Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission. I want to thank the Commission of Fine Arts for hosting this meeting on its Zoom platform. Also, thank you to Daniel Fox with CFA, who is helping us manage the meeting today. My name is Peter May. I'm here representing the Director of the National Park Service at this meeting. Present today for this meeting are Michael Sherman, representing the Chairman of the National Capital Planning Commission, Thomas Lubke, representing the Chairman of the Commission of Fine Arts, David Maloney, representing the Mayor of the District of Columbia, Mina Wright, representing the Administrator of the General Services Administration, Paul McMahon, representing the Secretary of Defense, Edwin Fountain, representing the Chairman of the American Battle Monuments Commission, Joseph Imamura, representing the Architect of the Capitol, and representing the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation is Chris Wilson. Mr. Wilson participates with the Commission in an on-voting advisory capacity. Finally, Sophie Kelly, the National Park Service Memorials Program Manager, is with us today, along with Beth Porter, our Commission Secretary and Legislative Affairs Specialist for the National Park Service National Capital Region. The National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission was established by the Commemorative Works Act of 1986 and is required by that act to advise the Secretary of the Interior, the Administrator of the General Services Administration, and committees of Congress on the establishment of commemorative works in the District of Columbia and its environs, and to provide its views to the appropriate committees of Congress when committees are considering legislation to authorize commemorative works within the District of Columbia and its environs. The Act also requires the sponsors of authorized memorials to consult with this commission regarding the design concept proposals. Today, we have 3 agenda items. First, an update on the Smithsonian Institution's site evaluation study for the American Women's History Museum and the National Museum of the American Latino. This site consultation is pursuant to the congressional authorization for these 2 museums, which require that the Smithsonian consult with the chairman of this commission on potential museum sites. HR 6720 to authorize the Thomas Paine Memorial Association to establish commemorative work in honor of Thomas Paine in the District of Columbia and its environs and for other purposes. And HR 6611 and its companion bill S 3579 to authorize the Embassy of France in Washington, D.C. to establish a commemorative work in the District of Columbia and its environs to honor the extraordinary contributions of Jean Monnet to restoring peace between the European nations and establishing the European Union and for other purposes. Now, I will, before I go into the regular order of business, we're going to jump ahead to receive testimony from Congressman Jamie Raskin, who has requested to provide testimony in support of his bill, HR 6720, as the first item on the agenda. So I assume at this point, Congressman Raskin is in the meeting and will be able to deliver his testimony at this point.
Chairman May, it looks like Congressman Raskin is having some technical difficulties, so it's not available right at this moment. They're still trying.
Okay. All right. Well, please continue to work with them, and I'm going to go ahead back to the agenda, and then we will interrupt later for Congressman Raskin. Thank you. So all supporting materials for this meeting can be found at the National Park Service web page, which is https://parkplanning.nps.gov/NCMAC July 2022. And if you need that link, it should be posted in the chat.
So sorry. Now Congressman Raskin is available. If he could be elevated to panelist.
Thank you very much. Congressman Raskin, we have already introduced you for your to provide testimony, so please go ahead whenever you are ready. I don't see you, but there we go. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking me and for your flexibility. You've got my written testimony, so I don't want to, bore everybody to tears by reading it. But I do want to say that America would not exist without Tom Paine. and it certainly would not exist as the world's first great constitutional democracy. Before Paine and the Revolution, everything was kings and queens and emirs and czars and emperors and you name it. And it was Paine's writings that came to define the meaning of America. And his vision was so much more comprehensive and sweeping, even than the most radical founders like Jefferson and Ben Franklin, that all of them attributed the success of the revolution to Tom Paine, because even Franklin and Jefferson were at the beginning, before Paine got there, just talking about vindicating the rights of Englishmen under the Magna Carta. And Paine said, we have the opportunity to create a completely new country. I mean, he got here in 1774, 2 years before the revolution, and he fell in love with the promise of America. He said that America would become a haven of refuge, an asylum to mankind, not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people fleeing from political and religious and economic oppression from all over the world. And he said, and once we created government on the principle of democracy and self-government, then the cause of America would become the cause of mankind. So we not only ourselves would incarnate and instantiate the principles of democratic self-government, but we would become a model and then an aid to people all over the world who themselves were trying to throw off the yoke of oppression. So Paine wrote in 1776, The Common Sense. It became America's first bestseller. It swept the country. There were more than 500,000 copies that were in print then. We tried to figure out what that would mean today. Something like 60 million copies. I mean, everybody was talking about common sense, because what he was talking about was creating government on a completely different principle, on the basis of freedom and rights. And of course, in the Declaration of Independence, that becomes the unalienable rights of the people, on the principle of equality among everyone. And that becomes the statement in the Declaration that all men are created equal. And then the idea of democracy itself, or the consent of the governed, as Jefferson would come to put it. And Jefferson, of course, comes to credit Paine for a lot of his ideas. But he wasn't just an ivory tower intellectual, Tom Paine. He was a rabble-rouser and an organizer of Americans against the crown and for the revolution. He had many stirring statements. The Times have found us. And then in 1776, when the revolution began, he wrote this beautiful pamphlet called The Crisis. This was the one that George Washington read to the troops at Valley Forge and in other places, and he had readings of it to the revolutionary troops wherever they were. But in it, he said this, I'll update the language a teeny bit at the instruction of Speaker Pelosi, just because, she claims correctly that Paine was a feminist, an early feminist who argued for the equal rights of women. But he wrote in this passage, these are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country. But everyone that stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. And those words were read to Revolutionary War troops in tattered uniforms, sleeping in dirty blankets in the mud. And Washington talked about the electrifying effect that it had on people. And he had lots of other writings that were so beautiful. My favorite is really his answer to Edmund Burke on the rights of man, when Burke was, attacking the French Revolution. Paine was a controversial figure because his passion for democracy was so overwhelming. And for that reason, he has been overlooked and he's been pushed to the side. But I think that Americans across the political spectrum can invoke him and cite to him and try to live up to his model. There were people on January 6th outside who were talking about Tom Paine. There were people on the inside talking about Tom Paine. And to the extent that all of us are trying to articulate the values of democratic self-government, he will always be a sterling example to us. Napoleon said that there should be statues erected to Tom Paine all over the world, because he was really the first great champion of democracy. So look, you guys know all of your standards better than I do. I looked at them quickly, and it seemed to me that Tom Paine meets all of your standards with flying colors in terms of being a figure of imperishable historical importance and significance. And it seemed to me you had kind of two different rankings. I would obviously argue for the bullseye center. I think that Paine is exactly the kind of person that we need to honor, that we should honor, and especially in this century where democracy is under siege all over the world, what better time could there be to honor him? So, thank you for checking out this petition. And I've got a bunch of members of Congress on my side. Because I've been busy with other stuff, I haven't spent a lot of time organizing, but I'm sure I can get more if that's something that you think you need, because there are people who cite Tom Paine all the time on the floor who aren't even yet on my list. And I'm happy to take any questions if you guys do it like that.
Well, thank you very much for providing those comments and for going off script, as it were. I will say for myself that you make a very compelling case, and not just for the passage of this legislation, but also it's a good way to start a meeting like this, because it's a reminder to all of us how important the work is of this commission when we consider questions like this. And I think we're frankly honored to have you here to talk to us about it. I do not have any questions for you. I appreciate having your written testimony. I would look around the room, as it were, the virtual room, and see if any of the other commissioners have questions. And those questions, commissioners who don't have their cameras on, if you are able to turn them on, please do so. I think we have a couple of people who are not showing. And if you could just physically raise a hand if you had a question, that'll probably be the easiest.
Chairman May, this is Edwin Fountain. My camera was on the fritz this morning, and now it seems to have died. So that's why I'm dark. Otherwise, you'd be looking at the top of my head from a different camera.
Okay.
Just two comments. Congressman Raskin, this is the second time I've heard you in less than a week. I heard your comments on the panel on January 6th to the Virginia Bar Association on Saturday, and I tried to send you a note through your office website, but it wouldn't accept my zip code because I live in Virginia, not Maryland.
And it's a ridiculous rule. We got to change that. But I'm happy to
commend you on those remarks and on this, on your presentation today. And also to say, while my history on this commission is not that long, I dare say this is the first time that Napoleon has been invoked as a supporter of legislation considered by
well, yeah, but that was very much in the background. I didn't want to necessarily cite a European text, although Paine, of course, was an Englishman who came over to help us in the Revolution.
Okay.
I appreciate your comments.
Does anyone else have any? Commissioner McMahon.
Hey, thanks, and thanks, Congressman Raskin, for coming. No questions, just a comment, especially since you just mentioned where Tom Paine started from, but having lived for 2 years as a high school kid in Thetford, England, and every day walking downtown and seeing his statue downtown, I think this may be a great addition to Washington, D.C.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate that. And I don't know exactly what role you guys play in terms of inscriptions, but there's so many beautiful ones, including the times that found this, but also I was thinking we have it in our power to begin the world over again. Which comes out of common sense.
I'm sure that in this circumstance, should the Congress approve the memorial and we get to the point of having a memorial design, we will be very glad to look over, I think, of worthwhile information that might be inscribed in that memorial. Believe it or not, sometimes not a lot of good inscriptions that can automatically go onto a given memorial, but I'm sure in this case.
Well, Tom Paine was the king of the 18th century soundbite, although he didn't want to be king of anything. But he said that in the monarchies, the king is law, but in America, the law will be king.
Well, thank you very much. I don't see anybody else indicating that they have questions or comments. So thank you again. We really do appreciate your taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm available for anything you guys need.
Okay, thank you. Our second agenda item is HR 6720, which was introduced by Representative Jamie Raskin to authorize the Thomas Paine Memorial Association to establish a commemorative work in the District of Columbia and its environs and for other purposes. We have heard from Representative Raskin already. We'd like to note that Representative Raskin submitted a letter of support for the legislation on behalf of himself and 10 members of Congress, and I think he offered to get more members of Congress behind that letter, but I don't know if that will be necessary. Anyway, we will now receive testimony from the representatives of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. So I would like to invite Mark Dann of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association to speak on behalf of HR 6720. Mr. Dann, you have the floor and are invited to introduce each of your colleagues who will speak today.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman May and fellow members of the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission. And special thanks to Beth Porter and her team who have been so generous with their time. I'm Mark Dann. I'm the Governmental Affairs Representative for the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. We're honored to present HR 6720, which, as Representative Raskin explained, would authorize the Thomas Paine Memorial Association to establish a commemorative work here in DC. Again, we cannot thank Representative Raskin enough for the masterclass on why Thomas Paine is a figure of great historical significance to the United States and to the American people. Also presenting today will be Margaret Downey, the president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, Gene Smith, who will speak from a veteran's perspective, Karen Heineman, who will speak from a conservative perspective, Mandisa Thomas, who will talk from an African-American perspective, and Charis Hoard, who will talk from a Generation Z perspective. As a DC resident, I fully understand the importance of NCMAC's work. I live near Rhode Island Avenue on 8th Street between S&T. A few blocks away from my house is the Carter G. Woodson Memorial Park. During the worst days of the pandemic, I would go there to sit, relax, and try not to think too much of the state of the world. I began to realize how the site offers a respite from one of DC's busiest thoroughfares, and the Memorial Park is filled with benches, trees, plants, and of course, a memorial to a great American. We fully understand how important NCMAC's work is to tell a story with the memorial, the site, and the overlooked feel and design of the area. And I hope with your expertise, we can do something similar. And now, Margaret Downey, the president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association.
Thank you, Mark. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association was founded in late 2021 as a 501c3 educational nonprofit organization designed to uphold and promote the legacy of Thomas Paine. Within a few months, we raised almost $500,000, and that came from donors as well as pledges to place a Thomas Paine Memorial somewhere in Washington, DC. Now, based on our research of the design and construction cost of memorials similar in size to the one we anticipate, that $500,000 figure would give the memorial a secure financial footing. Now, a similar project was approved in joint resolution in 1994. It was signed into law by President Clinton. The project was abandoned due only to a lack of funding, and this is why we are proud to announce that there will not be such a barrier with the current project. No government money or taxpayer dollars will be needed for the current proposed Thomas Paine Memorial. Now, some of Thomas Paine's key accomplishments include the writing of Common Sense, which outlined the compelling reasons for independence from England. He wrote the inspiring words found in the American Crisis, that 16 pamphlets that motivated Revolutionary War soldiers to continue fighting against all odds. Thomas Paine's crisis papers were read to troops across the colonies as the war raged on. His brilliant battlefield papers inspired the troops, and his quill served George Washington much better than a musket. His literary battlefield work made Thomas Paine one of America's very first veterans. Thomas Paine's book, Rights of Man, called for citizen representation over monarchy, public education, relief for the poor, and old age pensions. Thomas Paine was steadfastly in objection to slavery, and he publicly acknowledged his admiration of Native Americans. For these accomplishments, high morals, outstanding ethics, and for so much more, a memorial to Thomas Paine is needed. For me, working to build this memorial has been a decades-long passion. The life story of Thomas Paine is filled with exciting accomplishments, life and death situations, and written messages of hope, freedom, and democracy. When I moved to Pennsylvania in 1990, I immediately began to visit the areas in which Thomas Paine lived and worked. And I was surprised to find no significant recognition of him, even in the city of Philadelphia, the place where Benjamin Franklin introduced Thomas Paine to his fellow colonists as the fight for independence began. And I'm proud to have helped to place a historical marker at the location where Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, was published. I also began delivering educational programs to elementary schools about this often forgotten founding father. And it was such a joy to conduct the life and work of Thomas Paine assemblies in schools named after Thomas Paine. They're located in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Garden Grove, California, and Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association yearns for national recognition of this esteemed patriot in the form of a monument. And we hope to finally and significantly honor the man who fomented the Revolutionary War and who is largely responsible for the very creation of the United States of America. A memorial will inspire more study of his timeless writings and serve the public well as an educational tool. The passage of House Bill 6720 will enable the telling of a very important story in our history. A national memorial to Thomas Paine is long overdue, so I'm hoping that you will recommend moving forward with the proposal of a Thomas Paine Memorial in our nation's capital. And I'll close with the sincere hope that a Thomas Paine Memorial will build bridges of understanding and help the inhabitants of this great country heal prevailing divides as we push forward the promotion of democracy, equality, and justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. And now Jean Smith from a veteran's perspective. But I don't think Jean is on, so why don't we just move down to Karen Heineman to talk about Thomas Paine from a conservative perspective.
Yes, I will say I only saw a Gene Jones, not a Gene Smith.
Oh, actually, that is our guy. I apologize for messing up.
Okay, one moment.
Okay. Hi, Jean. Jean, you are in presenter mode and you're on mute. All right, there we go. So Jean,
you see and hear me? Yes, you can.
we can. Yeah, so thank you so much. And I apologize for confusing your name. So I need a little more coffee this morning, apparently.
That's not an uncommon problem. First off, I'd like to thank the commission members for taking the time to hear our testimony. And it was a pleasure to hear Representative Raskin. He took a little bit of our thunder, you might say, from the veterans perspective. But my name is Gene Jones, and I'm the president of Florida Veterans for Common Sense. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I served 4 years in the Air Force, and I was trained as a linguist and was honorably discharged in 1968. And as veterans, we believe that Thomas Paine should have a memorial. In our opinion, he ranks among the greatest of the founding fathers, and many called him the founding father. And we agree. Paine, a fellow veteran who served in the Continental Army as an aide to General Nathaniel Greene, was a thought leader who gave us the idea of America as an independent republic, as Representative Raskin said this morning. There are few veterans in American history who have done so much to save an army and win a war. Many know, of course, that Paine wrote Common Sense, which turned our rebellion into a revolution by the radical idea that America didn't need an English king. He argued that we could govern ourselves independent of England. What many people don't know is that after the defeat at New York, the Continental Army was in full retreat and on the verge of collapse. Morale was so low the troops were deserting. General Washington, a friend of Paine's, asked him to write something to motivate the troops. Paine sat at a drumhead and by candlelight wrote the Crisis Papers #1. And these words you've already heard this morning from Representative Raskin, and I won't try to recite them like he did so well, but it starts out, "These are the times that try men's souls." Paine's words were so stirring that General Washington ordered them read to the troops, and morale soared. The Army crossed the Delaware, we're all familiar with that, and they won the battles of Trenton and Princeton. And the Army, and thus the Revolution, was saved. As veterans, we say Paine conceived of the American idea, and he kept it alive at its lowest ebb. Paine should have a memorial that will continue to inspire us all with the promise of America, and that's what he believed in.
Great. Thank you so much, Gene. And now Karen to talk about Thomas Paine from a conservative perspective.
Thank you to the Commission for this opportunity. My name is Karen Heineman. I am a legal fellow with the Freedom from Religion Foundation and a registered Republican in Wisconsin. Although many Americans likely recognize the name Thomas Paine and recognize it as somebody from revolutionary times, the details of his great contributions to the cause of our independence and the founding of our Republican form of government are not so readily remembered. And this lack of recognition for a man who was a major figure in our fight to create our United States could be corrected by placing a commemorative work in our Capitol, and it's but a small step toward that goal. Thomas Paine, out of all of his writings, is likely best known for writing Common Sense. He recognized that a successful fight for our independence required the support of the people. And as an attorney, I can especially appreciate that Paine obtained that support by using the power of his pen to communicate and to persuade the colonists with logic and reason of the need to fight to separate from the rule of the distant British monarchy. And his arguments are considered to have influenced and motivated the creation of our country's first foundational document, the Declaration of Independence. As a conservative, I appreciate that Paine was a staunch champion of democracy and representative government. He consistently argued against oppression and for liberty. He was unwavering and unapologetic about his views, even to his own detriment at times. And as I speak in support of a bill that is in front of our House of Representatives to get this commemorative work in the DC area, the decision to allow a monument of a patriot who was instrumental in arguing for just this type of government of the people and for the people, it's not a revolutionary decision. It is a long overdue action. And it is time to remember and celebrate Thomas Paine for his contributions to our independence and the foundations of our representative government. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And now we'll hear from Mandisa Thomas to talk a little bit about Thomas Paine from an African-American perspective.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mark, and thank you to all the members of the commission for hearing us today. Again, my name is Mandisa Thomas, and I am the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, which is headquartered in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Pursuing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is integral to our work. And it is with this in mind that we support the memorial for Thomas Paine and his commitment to humanism and justice, including his anti-slavery advocacy, as Margaret Downey mentioned earlier. A little known fact is that on April 14, 1775, Paine and other Philadelphians formed the Society for Relief of Free Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage, which is America's first abolitionist group. Paine, who never owned slaves, wrote a 22-page handwritten letter to Thomas Jefferson that Paine signed from a slave. This letter, in which he admonished Jefferson for personally owning slaves, also argued that slavery was contrary to those ideas that Jefferson himself posed in the Declaration of Independence. My favorite Thomas Paine quote is, "I believe in the equality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy." This quote mirrors Paine's activism and life appropriately, given his advocacy for African-American education and his many writings, including an essay penned shortly after Common Sense in February of 1776, in which he stated, in part, that African slavery was against the laws of nature and reason. It is important to acknowledge that many institutions and their founders and leaders perpetuated and benefited from systems of oppression. That history cannot be unlived, but facing these difficult truths allow us to do our best work going forward. For many Black people, identifying with the founding fathers and the founding of the United States is complicated and complex. To know that freedom for all at that time only meant Anglo-Saxon landowners can be difficult to reconcile. However, this complexity is exactly why Thomas Paine should be memorialized, not only as a pioneering founding father, but also as a pioneering anti-slavery activist who made an indelible mark on America's social and political landscape. Let us honor Paine's legacy through this memorial in Washington, D.C., so that we can remain on the right side of justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandisa. And now Charis Hoard, who will talk from a Generation Z youth perspective.
Hello, and thank you to the Commission for your time. My name is Charis Hoard, and I am a recent graduate of Bowling Green State University's Master of Public Administration program, as well as a proud member of Generation Z. As Gen Z begins growing into adulthood and we're preparing to make our mark on the world, we're looking to those who came before us to guide us in the values that can lead America into a better future for all, and Thomas Paine is one such figure. Paine was a unique figure who saw the problems that his generation was facing, such as chattel slavery, poverty, and the tyrannical rule of the British Empire. But what truly sets Paine apart from others of his time is that he saw innovative ways that subsequent generations could do better for their fellow countrymen, which he outlined in his multitude of works. Generations ahead of workers' rights and Social Security, Paine believed that the United States should provide pensions for working men. Centuries before the Affordable Care Act, Paine advocated to support pregnant women to make sure that themselves and their families were properly nourished. Paine even promoted universal suffrage at a time when other founding fathers thought that only landowners should be able to vote, setting him light years ahead of his peers at the time. I see that same determined spirit of Thomas Paine and Gen Z. At the end of his lifetime, Paine was derided and seemingly excluded from popular history. However, he never let that fear stop him or override the duty to do what is right, to continue working toward a better future. The same can be said for Gen Z. While older generations may not understand our passion and fight on certain societal issues, our determination to do what is right and what we believe is right for the future of our country overrides any need for validation from the generations of our parents and of those in power. When generations have passed and most of us will be gone, What could those generations say about the legacy of Thomas Paine? And especially, what could they say about ours? I hope that they say that we, like Paine, we're steadfast in our mission to help all Americans live out their lives with security and to be in control of their own destiny. We know that many Paine's hopes for America have still not come to fruition, and we owe it to ourselves as a nation, as well as for those in the nation who come after us, to continue the fight that Paine started almost 250 years ago, pursuing the dreams of free thinking, rationality, and a more equitable America. Celebrating Paine's legacy with a memorial consecrates America's fight to continuously improve upon itself and bring about a brighter future for all. Thank you so much for your time, and I do hope you will support HR 6720.
Thank you, commissioners. And we would be more than happy to answer your questions and hear your comments and feedback.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that testimony. Thank you to the whole panel. First, I would ask whether any of the commissioners have questions for members of this panel before we go into a discussion or making our own comments. If anybody has a question, please raise a hand, either visibly or with the Zoom hand. Okay, I'm not seeing. Yes, Commissioner Moore.
Thank you, Commissioner, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank the panel for their testimony, especially want to thank Mr. Gene Jones for your service to our country.
You're welcome. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Ms. Wright?
What?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you maybe had turn off your mute button. I thought maybe you had something to say, a question. No?
No, I'm paying attention though.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we do not actually have any questions. I would like to thank all the members of the panel. I think this was extremely well put together. We often do not see an attempt to sort of give a sampling of views from many different people in support of a memorial. So it certainly was enlightening, and we appreciate all of that. And so we will excuse you from the meeting, and then we will go into our comments on the proposed legislation, or actually we'll stop, see if anybody else wants to testify, but we will let you guys go right now, and you can just stay tuned in and watch and listen. Ms. Ford, do we have anyone who has contacted us to testify from members of the public on this bill?
We do not.
We do not. Okay. Well, thank you. So, Mr. Fox, if you can take all the members of this panel who just testified down, and then we will go into the commission's discussion. Okay. Somehow there we go. Folks are starting to drop off. Okay. So, I will turn it now to members of the commission for any thoughts or comments you might have on this particular piece of legislation. Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I do have some opening comments before we go there. I've forgotten the regular order. Golly. It's like this is my first time and not my 15th or whatever it is.
You're
30th.
fired.
Okay. So I would just begin by mentioning that once again that there was a previously authorized memorial for Thomas Paine, authorized in 1993. However, they were unable to complete the memorial, and the authorizations expired in 2003. This bill was introduced on February 1st, 2022, and was referred to the House Natural Resources Committee. The subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands held a hearing on it, along with other bills, on July 14th. For the Interior, took no position and recommended that the committee defer action until this commission had reviewed the bill recommendations to Congress. The bill cites full compliance with Commemorative Works Act and includes all necessary language regarding funding. And as is the case with most new memorial, the bill prohibits federal funds from being used to pay for the establishment of this commemorative work. So I would now open the floor for any comments from members of the commission. Any thoughts on this particular piece of legislation? I saw Mr. Fountain's name pop up. Mr. Fountain, would you like to go first?
Certainly, thank you. Since I didn't have anything to add to the previous conversation, I'll lead off here. I would support this. In my mind, Thomas Paine's intellectual and rhetorical contributions to American independence and democracy were as significant and profound as George Mason's. George Mason is honored with a memorial here in the nation's capital. I would find it fitting to honor Thomas Paine as well. I think it's particularly timely given the 250th of American independence coming in 4 years. I would also just note as a point of interest, the tangential connection to the second memorial proposal we're going to hear about, in that Thomas Paine was active in France during the French Revolution. In fact, wrote The Age of Reason while he was imprisoned in France, and was freed from prison through the efforts of a future American president, James Monroe, who was serving as ambassador to France at the time. So I would support it. It would be great if this could be done in time for the semi-quincentennial. But I recall laying out a 4-year timetable for a memorial some time ago, and Mr. Lupke told me that it was, quote, insane. And he was correct. This memorial may not be as ambitious as that one, but still has to go through site selection, which will slow down the process, of course. But even if it doesn't happen in 2026, we've still got 7 years of commemoration of American independence following that. So no doubt it could be completed in that time. So I would support the legislation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fountain. I always appreciate the added historical context that you often bring to these discussions, not just about the memorial works, but your own personal experience in developing a memorial. All right, so now I'm going to pick on Commissioner Wright because she's not on mute.
Oh, man. Okay, well, I'll, of course, start off with the one-off. You can always count on me for that. I was kind of embarrassed that I didn't know as much as I should about Thomas Paine, so I looked him up over the weekend, and I will leave his political philosophizing to others, but add that his was a big tent of compassion, which we've heard about a little bit already, but also towards animals. And how can we go wrong? Everything of persecution and revenge between man, and everything of cruelty to animals is a violation of moral duty. He gets my vote.
Well, very good. Also, another interesting perspective on this particular memorial. Okay, so who would like to go next? I don't see anybody who's unmuted, so looking for hands, winks, nods.
I'll go next, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, good.
It'll be very brief. First, I want to say thanks to all the speakers and folks who testified, and special thanks to Mr. Gene Jones for your service. As a fellow veteran, I always like to try to recognize folks who take the time to testify who are veterans. I think NCPC has no issues with the Thomas Paine Memorial. I would like to take a moment and just mention that equity and representation are important priorities for this current administration. NCPC would like to acknowledge that there are many Americans who have made significant contributions to our history and culture, and like to continue to see greater representation of folks with different backgrounds and stories in the commemorative landscape. That's it for me.
Very good. Mr. Lupke, how about you? And then Mr. McMahon, who's also unmuted.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Are we, is the question of Area 1 before us today as part of this discussion? Okay.
No, that would be a second step.
Okay.
The initial authorization.
I don't really have anything to add. I mean, demonstrably, the very interesting testimony feeds into this, but it's one of these things. Thomas Paine is such a foundational thinker for our political history, the American experiment, et cetera. It's sort of hard to imagine that there isn't already one. I was just scratching my head like, is it possible that we don't have one? So I'm quite on board, and I think it's also interesting to see somebody who seems like everybody can get behind.
Thank you. Mr. McMahon.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the testimony of all the speakers today, especially Mr. Jones as a fellow vet, a retired vet. Thank you for your service too, sir. And I'll just emphasize again what I said after Congressman Raskin's comments, having lived for 2 years in Thomas Paine's birthplace in Thetford, England. I think it's about time we duplicate that with something appropriate here in Washington, D.C. I can support the measure.
And let's see, Mr. Maloney. Ms. Maloney? Yeah.
Well, I certainly agree with all the comments, and it is, I had the same reaction. It is surprising that there is not already a Thomas Paine Memorial here. Certainly agree wholeheartedly. I also agree with Mr. Sherman's comments that we in the district are also interested in increasing diversity in the monumental landscape of Washington. And not to take away from the importance of this memorial, but there certainly are other people with similar sort of impressive credentials who could be recognized and represent different facets of the American story.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Imamura, I don't think we've heard from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I have anything further to add. I align myself with all the comments of the commissioners that have spoken before me. Certainly a compelling case, and prepared to support the legislation.
Thank you very much. So I don't think I have anything in particular to add. I think we heard some very interesting and compelling testimony today, both from this most recent panel and then, of course, from Congressman Rankin as well. And I am certainly prepared to support this legislation as well. Thinking back on our past history, there aren't too many cases where we're all just 100% behind it, and we have an uncomplicated motion to consider, which would be a motion of support. I will say before we get to that point that I'll make one disclaimer, and this has nothing to do with my vote or support, but I will just mention the fact that I am a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, but that has nothing to do with my support of this legislation. So I don't often have that circumstance where I have some affiliation with somebody who's supporting this, but anyway. With that, I guess I would ask for a motion in favor of supporting this legislation and capturing some of the comments that we heard from the commission today.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. I will now ask, I'll do we'll go through a roll call vote, I guess, for this. So, Mr. Imamura?
Sorry, had to find the mute button. Yes.
Mr. Fountain?
Aye.
Mr. McMahon?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Maloney?
Yes.
Mr. Lubke?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
And the chairman votes yes as well. So we have unanimous support for that that motion. Thank you very much. And thank you again to everyone who testified and even watched today for that bill.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I know it wasn't stipulated in Area 1 or the reserve. It's very general. It says in and around. How do we define that? How do we define in or around Washington, D.C.? How far afield?
So it's Washington, D.C. and environs. So the Commemorative Works Act covers the original diamond of the district,
yeah,
less Virginia, except it does include the land area of the George Washington Memorial Parkway. That's the way we have interpreted it.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's that's the area that's authorized. And if in the course of doing site selection, they determine that they would want to go for Area 1, that will require separate legislation. And of course, that assumes they get this initial authorization.
Right, okay.
They did, the previous effort did have an Area 1 authorization as well. So hopefully, well, we'll see what happens with the legislation, but we will voice our support to the committees considering this legislation.